Good evening. It's great to see you. I'm Don Michaels. I'm the director of the honors program. And again, I want to welcome our 470 new freshman honors students to Colorado State University. You are our largest entering class in the history of the program. So glad to have you here. Are you happy to be here? Also, with this large class, we now have 25 recitation sections taught by 50 of our peer mentors. And you've met them today, and I think you would agree that we have the best group of peer mentors ever in the program. And I want to recognize these peer mentors here. Fantastic. All right. So before we get started with Dr. Grandin's address, I have a couple of students who'd like to make an announcement for some activities coming up. I'd like to invite Aiden and Keelan up here, talking about something that they've organized for tomorrow morning.
Hello, everyone. I am Aiden.
And I am Keelan, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
And mine are he, him, and his. And so we're just here to tell you about a fantastic opportunity, much like the honors program, happening tomorrow. And it is a sustainability-led, or a student-led sustainability program teaching you about the green initiatives that you can take part about here in campus.
Yeah, so it's totally an optional program. We would love to have you all. It's at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we're just going to talk about what sustainability even is and what that means at CSU, because we're on a campus where sustainability is really integral to who we are. We're going to have a lot of fun activities and prizes, and we're going to go to lunch afterwards, so it'd be a great way to continue to meet your fellow peers and learn about sustainability at CSU. So it is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. It'll only be like an hour long, and then we'll go to lunch. It's in Academic Village, and on the honors floor is on B110. And we would love to have you all. And we can only have about 40 to 50 people there, so please show up on time at 10 o'clock if you would like to attend. Unfortunately, it is a capped event, but we would love to see all your beautiful faces there, so thank you.
And now I'd like to have Kayla come up and talk about the Honors Student Association.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. My name is Kayla. I'm one of the two co-presidents of the Honors Student Association. We're a community service-based club here on campus. We will be passing out these flyers with a little bit more information about the club as well as the first meeting after the talk, so please look for any of us in these nice green shirts with our logo on it. There will be a few of us officers standing out there hanging around to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kayla. So Kayla and other members of the HSA will be outside at the reception and have information for you if you'd like to pick up more about that. So, I think you all came here to hear Dr. Grandin, is that right? It is indeed a privilege to have Dr. Temple Grandin speak to us tonight to kick off the academic year. I want to welcome you all to this newest members of the honors community. This coming year, you will learn what it means to be part of this community through your seminars, recitations, and activities. This lecture is intended as a start of this process, as it provides a unique experience and lasting memory that you will share with your fellow students from this day forward. Dr. Grandin is professor of animal sciences and is, without a doubt, the most famous person at CSU. Very few professors can claim that that a movie has been made about their life. Her courses are in high demand and often fill within minutes after registration opens. You, as honor students, have a better chance of getting into those seminars and courses, as one of the many benefits of being part of our community is priority registration. Right, peer mentors? You like They love that. Dr. Grandin has an international reputation for the design of animal handling facilities and for the ethical treatment of animals. She has received numerous awards and recognition. In 2016, she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She has authored over 70 publications and 15 books. We at CSU are justifiably proud of having Dr. Grandin as a distinguished member of our faculty. She represents the best of our university, an outstanding scholar, teacher, and mentor who provides valuable service to the livestock industry, as well as informing the public about autism spectrum conditions. Please welcome Dr. Grandin to the stage.
It's great to be here today. I've got a very bad cold, so I might have to get a cough drop to stop from coughing. Started yesterday. I don't feel really good at all. Now, when I was a little kid, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism, and I was lucky to get really good early educational intervention. Another thing that my mother did is she developed my strengths. You know, kids that end up getting a label, dyslexia, autism, something like that, they're usually good at one thing, bad at something else. Like they might be super good at math, then they need to be moved ahead in math. Or they might be super good at art. You know, my thing that I was good at was the art side of things. Because in designing, there's two sides. There's the art side. Let's take the iPhone, for example. An artist made the interface. So you didn't need a PhD in engineering to use the phone. But the mathematically inclined engineers had to make the inside of the phone work. That's the different kinds of minds. And I had a chance to go to a SpaceX launch at Cape Kennedy. I mean, I just had to show off some of the, I have to say the iPhone, I couldn't believe the camera on that phone. I could get these pictures. It's a great camera. But a lot of kids today don't get out and do enough things. We gotta get them out doing stuff. Another thing I learned after going to Cape Kennedy is maybe the right stuff rode the rockets. But the geeks and the nerds, they built the rockets. You see, a brain can either be more social or a brain can be more cognitive. Yeah, you take out some social stuff, then you got engineering circuits up there in the brain. And there is the SpaceX's headquarters there, and you can see a launch pad in the distance. And I had a chance to visit a launch pad. And engineers need visual thinkers. Because as a visual thinker, and everything I think about is in a picture, I see risk. And as I walked around underneath that launch pad, I saw something that wasn't supposed to be there. A raccoon waddled down the stairs and went off into the bushes. And I got to thinking, and what have you been chewing? There's a lot of stuff in there that if he chewed it, it would not be good. That's seeing risk. When I found out why Fukushima melted down, I just couldn't believe it. What I learned about the mathematician is they try to calculate risk. They don't see it. And the reason why Fukushima burned up is they made a visual thinking mistake so colossal I couldn't believe it. I can't design a nuclear reactor. That's up to you guys to do that. But when you live next to the sea, it's not a very good idea to put the super important electrically operated emergency cooling pump in a non-waterproof basement. If they had put in watertight doors, it would not have happened. How could they make that mistake? They didn't see it. Another big concern, and I know there's a lot of engineers here, infrastructure falling apart. I travel all the time. This year, in the last 12 months, I've had 3 hotels where the water broke. I've been traveling for years and years and years and years, like 40 years. This never used to happen before. Nice hotels, Pittsburgh Sheraton. We came this close to doing a 900-person conference with porta potties. Wouldn't that have been a great big mess? Infrastructure's breaking. It was the pipes out in the street. You see, you need all the different kinds of minds. You know, there's some people that are good at the non-mathematical side of engineering that are going to build all those pipes in the ground. Yeah, they're playing video games in the basement. And that's something that I talk to a lot of parents about. Their kid gets labeled autistic, and Well, doesn't learn shopping, doesn't learn a lot of different things. No, he needs to be fixing those pipes. That's what he needs to be doing. There's some more SpaceX pictures right there, taken with the iPhone 6. Now, I've worked on a lot of big meatpacking plants. One here in Greeley, the Fort Morgan plant. Oh, you can Google Earth them and see some of my stuff. And I watched our industry go from hand drafting to computer drafting. And I noticed a really odd thing started to happen. There were weird mistakes made on drawings. Like, for example, the center of the circle wasn't in the center of the circle. And in every case, that drawing had been made by somebody who'd never built anything with their hands and never drawn by hand. Then I went out to Pixar, the big animation studio. They find that sometimes they got to get the people off the computers and have them draw stuff by hand, or print it out with a 3D printer and then touch it. You got to touch to perceive. Well, let's look at AI. You know what worries me is hackers. Okay, you got an artificial intelligence program to diagnose stuff. What if somebody gets in there and feeds it the wrong information? That's what worries me, the hacking. I was reading about the voting machines. Well, it's too easy for somebody to stick a rogue USB stick into something. Yep, someone said to me, I had to make sure the election didn't get rigged. I'm going to use paper ballots, machine scannable, because that is absolutely hacker-proof. Yep, Hal better have an off switch. And you go back and you watch that movie, the reason why Hal wanted to kill the astronauts is he thought the astronauts would jeopardize the mission. It was really simple. He wasn't psychotic. His goals just got different. Okay, we need to be keeping these kind of classes in the schools. Art, sewing, woodworking, theater, all of these kinds of things. And there's actually a study that was done that showed that a Nobel Prize winner in science was more likely to have had a creative hobby than a non-Nobel Prize winner in science. So this brings up the whole thing of not getting too narrow in what you do. Isaac Asimov had a really good quote. You get too narrow, you become an expert in one subdivisional sliver of nothing. Yep, we need to get out there and get across the silos. Now, I was a lousy student, and I didn't get interested in studying until I had the goal of becoming a scientist. Well, I got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting. I was really a dreadful student. Then my science teacher came along, got me interested in science. And I'm one of these non-mathematicians that can't do algebra. But you need us to prevent mistakes like Fukushima. I couldn't believe it when I found out what caused that to happen. Okay, let's look at some observations. I've been noticing a lot of grandfathers coming up to me, and they find out they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. Most of them had good careers. See, part of autism is just normal brain variation. A brain can be more social emotional, or it can be more thinking. And I found a mind-blowing paper that the same genes that make human beings have a gigantic brain, proliferation of stem cells, are the same genes that cause autism and schizophrenia. And what happens in autism is you get an overgrowth in the back. So maybe you got a math genius, but you leave out all the social stuff in the front. You see, there's trade-offs. You get people with bipolar have more relatives in creative careers, and people in engineering, they got more people with tech careers, again, more cognitive or more social emotional. In the milder forms, it's not a disability. Because I can assure you, there's going to be some engineering majors that I know are on the spectrum. I've been out to the engineering places. So one kid is getting a great job at going to a great career going to CSU, and another kid's playing video games in the basement. Another thing, get out and do internships. Find out what you like, find out what you hate. Try on careers. I originally was a psychology major, and I ended up designing slaughterhouses. One of the reasons why I ended up designing slaughterhouses is there's no academic barrier of entry. That was one of the reasons why I went into that field. But you need us. Because if I'd been working on a construction project for Fukushima, I would have ordered the watertight doors, and it would not have happened. Because I see risk. I don't try to calculate it. I'm going to have to take a cough drop. I know that's kind of rude, but I've got a really bad cold. It came down with. The thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some big top innovators today? Thomas Edison would be labeled autistic. And a lot of these great innovators, they had an unconventional career path. What would happen to them today? Jane Goodall, she did her famous work with a 2-year secretarial degree. That was her training. Thomas Edison, he was labeled as a hyperactive adult high school dropout. What would happen to him today? And Steven Spielberg, dyslexic, bullied, bad student. You know what saved him? His little Super 8 movie camera. Again, exposure to the career interest. Can't emphasize that enough. And how about Elon Musk here? And I'm kind of nerdy. Now, some of our most successful companies right now aren't run by the financial people. They're run by the technical people. Musk, Facebook, Amazon, these are all people that are into stuff. You've got a lot of other companies where Wall Street's taking things over. They're not into stuff. And there is the Dragon spaceship docking with the space station. You know, its real name is Puff the Magic Dragon. And I got a chance to go visit the control room for the space shuttle, for the space station. And you might wonder, why is nobody there? Because it's during the 6 minutes of blackout when there's no communication and they've all run off to the bathroom. They got 6 minutes, and then they got to be back. Because even if there was an emergency, there's nothing they can do about it. And there's the space station simulator. I made sure I took that picture so it didn't look like it was all taken apart. Common denominators of successful minds. Growing up with lots of learning. Early exposure to career interests. Now the thing is, I'm sure all of you are really good at academics. But academics is only one kind of work. The other kind of work is just getting the job done. Maybe you got a mean boss you have to deal with. I've had that problem. Also, don't get over-specialized. Mix up the majors. Computer science, electrical engineering, some physics, some biology. Don't get too narrow. And go into internships. And here's a study that showed that a Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby. So it is a good idea to get out and do some other things. Here's Steve Jobs. Oh, he would have been in special ed today. He was a weird loner who brought snakes to his elementary school classroom. Let's liven it up with snakes. Bullied in school. Einstein had no speech until age 3. That both of these had creative hobbies. Calligraphy and playing the violin. Seeing a lot of kids getting different labels. So one geek gets to go build stuff at NASA or some other really fun thing, and another geeky kid is playing video games in the basement. Silicon Valley parents limit video games. And I'm seeing over and over again, the moms will come up to me and say, well, he's 22 years old, he's holed up in the basement playing video games. And the one kid who actually went on to design video games was a kid where mom restricted them. And he went on to design them. Okay, dyslexic CEOs. JetBlue, pretty nice airline. Their CEO is dyslexic. And the head of IKEA, dyslexic. See, some of these people were visual thinkers. I'll be talking a little later on. I think in pictures. The mathematician thinks in patterns. It's pattern thinking instead of visual thinking. And here's Gary Cohn from Goldman Sachs, horrible student. But one thing he did, and I actually agree with this, knowing where you want to end up is easier than figuring out where to start. You know how he started? He grabbed a cab with a fancy-looking guy in a suit in front of Wall Street and talked his way into a job he didn't know how to do. So sometimes you just don't know where your career is going to go. And here's Tina, political science major. And she was the head of the project for building our new chemistry building. She made real good use of a political science degree. Well, she started answering phones for a construction company. Then she started doing some bidding. And then she's running jobs. Yeah, but you see, the political science major would have people skills. You're running a construction job, you've got to have some people skills. Okay, research on creative geniuses. One of the big things is they did not over-specialize. Now, this is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. And I've talked about this in my book, The Autistic Brain. I'm a photorealistic thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. That's why algebra was impossible for me. That's why kids that can't do algebra need to go to geometry and trig. And then you have the pattern thinker. They think in patterns. Not pictures, but patterns. That's more the engineering mind, the mathematical mind. Then you have the verbal thinker. Good talker, be great at sales. And then you have some people where everything is auditory. They might be into music. Music and math tend to go together. And there's scientific evidence that there really is different ways that people think. So your first step is learning that different kinds of thinking actually exist. Then you can figure out how they can work together on a project. Okay, let's start kid in robotics. I'd work on the mechanical parts of the robot. And somebody else is going to work on the programming of it. And I turned out I really liked an English literature class I took. I thought I was going to hate it. But it helped me to understand other people. Here's what Thomas Edison had to say about mathematicians. I can always hire a mathematician, but they can't hire me. And there's my book, The Autistic Brain, which I'll be happy to sign afterwards. I'm really sorry about all the coughing, but it came down a really bad cold. And I'm worried that our educational system's screening out some of the visual thinkers. You need us. When I worked on big projects, like a big meatpacking plant, the drafting department would lay out the whole entire plant. Then the clever guys down in the shop would invent the really clever equipment. And then the more mathematically inclined engineers would do power requirements, boilers, refrigeration systems. You have to have the whole team. And sometimes the visual thinkers aren't given enough credit. It made me really angry when I went to a big fancy-dancy place, and the engineers had the offices up in the tower, and then the drafting department and the millwrights, they put them down in the basement. No, you have to have them all. How do you think the Mars rover would work if you hadn't had any millwrights to build it? You wouldn't have had it. And visual thinkers are needed in science, because one of the problems in science is replicating biomedical experiments. A big, big, big problem. And some of the problems, it has to do with small differences in the method. For example, one set of researchers just shook their samples really hard, and another one just sort of rocked them. And that totally changed the results, just how they mixed up their samples. So when I review journal articles, I want to know, how did you actually do this experiment? You didn't tell me what breed of pig you used in it. You've got to describe what you did better. Different ways to do math. Different ways to get the same thing done. Here's an example of pattern thinking. Making things with origami. It's patterns. That's probably how a lot of the engineers here think. But I see specific pictures. I see pictures, and then I take pictures and I sort them into categories. And when I asked a physicist, about church steeples, he saw motion of people singing and praying. I just see specific church steeples, and I can start naming them off. Then I can start to sort them into different categories, cathedrals, chapels, and various different categories. Take the iPhone. We needed all the different kinds of minds to make the iPhone work. It's a perfect example. You need the artist mind, the industrial designers, and the engineering mind so it would actually work. Yep, we don't want to get too over-specialized. I talked to a top plant scientist a couple of years at the poster session, and he said a lot of these graduate students are so narrow, they don't have any creativity. Also, every crop scientist I talk to says we got to do crop rotation. The problem with monoculture, it works great in the short run, and in the long run, it's a bunch of big problems. But in the short run, it works. I work with a lot of big corporations. Boy, I can tell you, the financial types up there at the top, no vision at all. Yeah, let's look at some college majors. Mix up some engineering with computer science, maybe some biology and chemistry, put some philosophy and history together. In my own case, I had psychology, animal behavior, biology and neuroscience, and read some literature, have some ethics. Think about what you're doing. I just read a big book on artificial intelligence that I picked up at the airport. There's a tendency for the technical community to be very overly optimistic that there won't be problems. I can see problems with hacking. You have an expert system that does diagnosis and the hacker gets in there and tells it the wrong stuff. That would be bad. You know, there was also a thing that Microsoft had to take off the market, kind of an assistant, and a bunch of people got really nasty. They taught her to be really racist and nasty. It's not good. Here's what Asimov had to say about getting too narrow. A degree is the first step down a ruinous highway. You don't want to waste it, so you go into doctoral research. You end up being a thoroughgoing ignoramus on everything in the world except for one subdivisional sliver of nothing. You don't want to do that. Artificial intelligence is really good at specialized tasks. Here's a program that can diagnose skin cancer. Now, some other stuff they were doing on cancer, it didn't work out so well. But something like melanomas, it works really well. And I learned that it thinks exactly the way I think. It's bottom-up thinking. Concepts are formed by taking specific examples and putting them into categories. So that artificial intelligence program is going to sort melanoma from non-melanoma. And here's some professions I wouldn't be bothered with. Radiology, endocrinology, oncology. Wouldn't be bothered with that. Now you want to fix the plumbing at the Pittsburgh Sheraton? You're guaranteed to have a job. That's not going to go away. The people that are more general thinkers. See, everything I think about is a picture. I don't think in an abstract way. Well, here's the ultimate bottom-up thinking. We're not making any hypothesis up front. We're using patient-derived data to create the hypothesis. So you're top-down in science. You've got to have the hypothesis first. And then, no, here you make the hypothesis from the data. That's more like how I think. And using machine learning to find all kinds of new materials, all kinds of great stuff. Now, being a visual thinker really helped me in my work with animal behavior. I noticed that cattle would balk at little things that other people didn't see, like maybe a coat on a fence, a chain hanging down, a reflection on water. And other people didn't see these things, and it's not stupidity. It's simply that they don't see the visual detail. Well, here's something I saw right on the sidewalks here on campus when we had the eclipse. Eclipse shadows. I watched hundreds of students walk over this. They didn't pay attention to it. I didn't know that eclipses made these weird shadows. I noticed this. The other people didn't. Chains hanging down in chutes. Maybe it's a yellow tape on a fence. Okay, I want you to raise your hand if you could see that that animal was looking at the sunbeam. Oh, we're doing absolutely atrocious. And the reason for this is a lot of you are mathematicians. But you need us, because you don't want to end up making a mistake with artificial intelligence. It's like a Fukushima type of mistake, simply because you didn't say it. Okay, let's go back to the voting machines. I see somebody coming in there with a virus-laden USB stick, and they shove it in the voting machine because they didn't glue the ports shut. Yep, I can see that happening. You see, I see risk. I don't calculate risk. That's the difference. I saw the raccoon. Nobody else saw the raccoon except for me. Now, animal memories are specific because they're sensory. It's a picture. It's a specific smell. It's a touch sensation. It's sensory-based. Verbal thinkers, like administrators, for example, and all the suits that you're going to hate once you get out in the workplace, all the dumb suits. When I worked in construction, there's two things we used to do. Sit around and talk about how to build stuff and talk about how dumb the suits were and how much we hated them. That's what we used to do. And boy, I can tell you, some of these suits, they're so short-sighted, it's dangerous. Okay, now, why is seeking knowledge with something like the Voyager spacecraft important? You know, you get a kid labeled autistic, maybe a really smart kid. What turns them on is knowledge. 40 years later, this Voyager's still putting signals back out. And an 81-year-old scientist is going to the strip mall to communicate with Voyager. Why is he doing that? It's seeking knowledge. I can relate to that because just learning, that turns me on more than socializing does. Then it passed Saturn on the way. There's Ed Stone, and I get emotional about this. It's still transmitting. And they got to get 3 different huge antennas lined up to do this. So that's the geeks, bootlegging the budget, doing it at 3 o'clock in the morning, so the mission control in the strip mall next to the puppy training center and the McDonald's can get the signal. And what is Ed Stone going to get from this? Maybe he's going to learn why we're a Class M planet, why we have life on Earth. I don't understand some of the physics, but when I read this in the New York Times magazine on a plane, I was crying for the whole flight. You see, he was looking for knowledge. That's his whole reason for living. He says, yeah, and I'm training some 50-year-olds on some of the ancient technology. Now, I do a lot of talks to schools. We got to get kids out learning how to work. I talk about that all the time. They're not learning how to work. I'll tell you about some business majors that came from here. They got hired by a grocery company, and they thought they didn't have to set up a meat case. And they go, we got news for you. You are setting up a meat case. It's not beneath you to do that. They thought it was beneath them to get out in the field. You got to get out in the field and find out exactly what's going on. You got to do that. Okay, here's my work stuff. Sewing job at 13. For 3 years, I cleaned horse stalls. Went to the School of Horse Barn Management. Cost my parents a lot of money. Carpentry work. And I did internships before there were internships. Yeah, I can't emphasize those internships enough. And I was building things, and I was painting stupid signs at the carnival. Now, how did I get those jobs? I showed off my work. When you're weird and when you're awkward, what you do is sell your work rather than yourself. You got some really nice programming, go in there and show them the programming. Show off your work. There's my sign painting truck. I wasn't over-specialized. I had a great animal behavior class. That was one of the things that got me interested in animal behavior. Good professors. Okay, and I had some good mentors. Always building up my area of strength and stretching it and broadening it. What happened to me today? Yep, I get good speech therapy, but one of the things I'm worrying about is I'd be a prime candidate for video game addiction. And these kids that get addicted to video games, they're going nowhere. They're not going into the video game industry. That's not happening. And for some kids, they're a drug. Other kids, that's not the case. And the other thing I'm seeing, too many kids to get a label. They let the label totally define them. For me, the college professor comes first. Or maybe when you're younger, engineering would come first. You're an engineering student. If you saw the HBO movie, I was pinning cattle pins on myself. Identifying with the cattle industry, that came first. And we got to do practical things. I know in the engineering programs, they're getting kids out doing more practical stuff. But there's still kids today that don't know how to hook up a garden hose. And I talked to a guy just last year that was running an oil rig, and he had a new kid working on the rig, and he didn't know what a hose was. This is getting really bad. Now, I got a chance to go out and do all these fancy-dancy brain scans. And I found out I've got big visual thinking circuit in my head. And there's another brain scan. Now, this technology is in the hospital right now. Why is it not being used? The reason it's not being used is silos. Turf wars between the neurologists and the psychiatrists. This technology is in the hospitals right now and not being used for this purpose. And right there, you can see where my working memory is just all full of water. That's why I couldn't do algebra. This doesn't make any sense to me. Meat industry, you got to be able to read and write, do 6th grade math. And I worked with a lot of quirky millwrights and steel workers. They're not given enough credit. Well, I can tell you that Pittsburgh Sheridan needs them really, really bad right now. And what saved me in math is I took finite math, probability, and statistics. Yeah, for certain things like chemistry, yeah, you need algebra. But you also need the industrial designer side of it. Think about the iPhone. Books were a really important part of my life. I loved to invent things as a kid. In fact, I've got a new book called Calling All Minds. It has my childhood projects. And I loved reading about inventors. I loved Black Beauty. My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. And I would spend hours and hours and hours tinkering with little bird kites. A lot of kids today are too afraid to make mistakes. No, I'd tinker and tinker and tinker. Early exposure to career interests. So get out and do a lot of things. Now, when you're weird, the way I impressed clients was showing my work off. This is the drawing right here that in the late 80s, I used to sell the Cargill Corporation on designing the cattle handling facilities for every beef plant in North America. And when people looked at my drawing, they went, wow, you did that? Here's the brochure. Here is some of the pictures that were in the original brochure. See, back in the 70s, color printing cost a fortune. So I stuck with black and white. And there's the one they made for the movie. And this is some of my first jobs just starting. The thing is, construction is about outcomes. You got to get it done. There's an urgency. There's an outcome. It's the outcome. And here's a system, one of my systems I designed for a big meat plant, center track restrainer system. I like to show this to parents of autistic kids and go, you know, don't stick your nose up at metal work. Stupid people don't do that kind of complicated metal work. And you're going to have some projects that you might do. Have some respect for the people that can do this. We need to haul their butts out of the basement and not let them get addicted to video games, because you need them to build your projects. Food factories and all kinds of factories are short of maintenance people. There's some more of my drawings. And I'd show pictures off, you know, show the things I designed. Okay. I want to just mention, people ask me all the time what I'm the most proud of. I got things I designed I'm really proud of. But the thing that probably made the most improvement in the meat industry was a very simple scoring system I developed. Using the principle of HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points. What are the really important things you measure in animal handling to determine if they're doing it right? There's a diagram of the center track restraint. I got a video, beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin. You can look at that. But I figured out 5 simple things to measure. The trick is picking out which 5. And it's like traffic. All right, let's see how good you are using the principle of critical control points. Let's say in traffic, you could only enforce 3 rules. Which 3 rules would you enforce for maximum public safety? And you're only allowed to do 3. Okay, which 3 would you enforce? 3 rules. Only allowed to enforce 3 traffic rules. What? Speed, yes, that's one of them. What? No. No, it would be speeding, stopping violations with red lights and stop signs, and drunk driving. Think about it. Those are your top 3. Now, if I was going to do the top 5, I'd add seatbelts. But the reason why they're not in the top 3 is they protect me. They don't protect you against me. So that's why they're not in the top 3. And then texting and distracted driving. I'd have that in there. And the thing is, all of these things are really objective. The other thing that's a problem in writing up guidelines for things, people will say, do it properly, or handle cattle properly. What's doing it properly? I don't know. You gotta be clear. Traffic rules are also clear. You measure speed with a device. And one of the measurements I found that was really good to show bad problems in handling cattle at a meat plant is mooing. Man, if they're mooing and bawling, you're doing something terrible to them. Then I could measure it. And when we first started, okay, let's look at, you got to make them dead at the meat packing plant. Then in the beginning, only 30% can make them dead with a single shot, 95% of the time because equipment was broken. That's management. Maintenance of equipment is a constant battle. I don't care what industry you're in. It is a constant battle. Okay, different kinds of minds working on the job. I already talked a little bit about this. You need the whole team to build a big, complicated food factory, or to build, a rocket, or to build some other type of thing. You've got to have the whole team. But the first step is realizing that different people think differently. Like I did my book, Calling All Minds, with Betsy, my agent, and she's a total verbal thinker. And I was trying to explain to her the concept of leverage. We were on 3rd grade elementary school science sites. And I realized I've got to explain it to her so she can write it out in words. That was a learning, experience for me. See, once you realize that different people work differently, you can put them together in teams, and the skills complement each other. We got to make sure we don't screen out a lot of those unique kind of minds. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I always like to do lots and lots and lots of questions. So we'll do some questions, and let's just maybe pick you right there. You got a question? And I'll repeat the question. How do I organize it? Well, I have different books about different things. Now, what I tend to do on organization, like if you look at my book, Thinking in Pictures, or The Autistic Brain, is each chapter is, okay, there's a sensory chapter. There's a chapter on jobs. There's a chapter on the different kinds of minds. A chapter on diagnosis. And each chapter tends to be kind of freestanding. That's how a visual thinker organizes things. You put information into categories. And one of the things what I learned I had to do was make an outline. Now, I'm finding a lot of students today have got some really bad problems with their writing skills because nobody went back and copy-edited their work. And one of the things to help you is read your work out loud. Stand up and read your paper out loud. And this is something that's gotten especially bad in the last 5 years. And what I've observed is the students that are bad at writing, they never had a teacher in elementary school or high school mark up their work and then have them go back and correct it. That's something they need to do. And writing skills are skills that you really, really need to have. Okay, maybe someone back here. Okay, right there? The movie? On accuracy, the work stuff was real accurate. The visual thinking was accurate. How I think visually, that was real accurate. The projects I did were accurate. There were some things I took some liberties with, but the visual thinking was accurate, and all the projects shown in the movie I actually did. And there's a scene in the movie where I go up and I get the editor's card. That was important, because in that scene, I saw a doorway to opportunity. Get his card, start writing for that magazine. Then that enabled me to get into some big national conventions for free. I saw that opportunity. You know, a lot of people will go and send out a zillion resumes that nobody reads, or some bot just throws them out. But there's an awful lot of jobs that people get just through personal connections. I'll tell you another little thing. Pick the horn up and use it. Yeah, the horn now has got a different shape. It's got a different shape now than my generation. But one of my students had to get some new kinds of tests for one of our projects. And I told her to pick up the phone and start calling people. And she tracked it down. She would have never done that with email. She was really surprised. She found out she was talking to the inventor of the test, because she just got up on the phone and started calling up professors. That's a real useful skill when you got to find some stuff out. There's still a place for doing that. Okay, right there. Well, how would my success be different growing up in your generation? I'm really concerned about the video game addiction. I would have been a prime candidate for video game addiction. Also, I'm not seeing enough of teaching of work skills. I'm seeing kids, smart kids that ought to be here in this honors class, that are 16 years old and they've never gone grocery shopping. That's ridiculous, because they kind of go, well, poor little Tommy's got autism and we'll get to do the shopping for him. They've got to learn these skills. And see, the thing about autism is in the milder forms, well, I'm sure there's some people here tonight that are probably on the milder end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got someone who can't dress themselves. And the problem is, it all has the same name. It's a continuous trait. In the milder forms, it's just personality variation. I don't consider it a disorder. More severe forms, I had severe speech delay. Yes, that's a disorder. And I was very lucky to get a lot of good early one-on-one teaching to get my speech started. Yes, I could have gone, either way. Silicon Valley, they limit the video game playing and screen time because they know it's addictive. Yeah, don't get holed up in the dorm and get addicted to video games. Every year there's a few of those that drop out, and that's the reason. Okay, how about over here? Okay, right there.
So I have a question, because I feel like I go about my everyday, and people are like, why aren't you just using common sense? Like, I'll ask them a question, and they'll be like, that's a common sense question. But I feel like as you were saying, like you need things, like explained. It needs to be in the manual. You can't just have like a broad brush spectrum of like mix the vial. Like you have to be specific.
Well, in the common sense, I think part of the problem we got today is a lot of students today are totally removed from the world of the practical. Where you just got to figure out how to fix things or figure out how to do something. And some of the common sense is doing those things. And I'd recommend engineers, whatever it is you do, you better go out and find out what they're doing with the AI program out in the field. You better go find out what's going on in the field, because they'll be doing something weird to it. And when I started up my center track restrainer system, I went to the first 7 plants, because when I went to plant number 2, they made a stupid modification on it, which would have totally wrecked it. Now, it was well-intentioned modification, but it really messed it up in terms of how the cattle behaved. So let's say you're starting out with a new technology. Make sure your early adopters don't fail. Another little piece of advice when you're picking out where to start using a new technology, choose your early adopters carefully. Make sure your early adopters are in love with it and they want to make the thing work. Because I've got a cute little patent where I got the wrong plant shoved down my throat, and the local plant manager didn't want the piece of equipment. He made it fail. Then on the center track restrainer, we had the right plant. We had a plant manager and a superintendent that wanted this project to work. That is super, super important. Any technology, when you're out beta testing it, make sure your early adopters do not fail. Can't emphasize that enough. Okay, right there. Well, yeah, if he's good at math, you don't want to take a third grader that's good at math and get him so bored with baby math that he turns into a behavior problem. Give him the college textbook in the third grade classroom. But that kid's probably going to need some help with reading, because that tends to be the pattern. The little mathematicians tend to have problems with reading. Well, that's where Silicon Valley sends all their kids. They send them for Montessori education. Well, you see, that's a very, very general sort of question. I just want to put the slide up there. Yeah, that's the slide I want to just leave it up there, of the different kinds of minds. We got to start thinking a lot more about outcomes. Where is a student 10 years after high school? You see, that's more the food safety critical control point approach. I can tell you some places I don't want them to be: dead, jail, or addicted to drugs. I want to make darn sure he doesn't end up there. No, I want to see him out in a career he's going to like. And you were talking about sustainability. You know, I put an article up in my website. I hope they got that corrected, because it's got stabilization instead of sustainability on it. My webmaster made a mistake on that. But if you, let's say you're in charge of the sustainability program for a big food company, maybe the first thing you do is define what it's not. Okay, if a farm dumps all their manure in the river, that's definitely not sustainable. Or you suck all the water out of the ground and run the aquifer dry. That's not sustainable. So if I'm running a supply chain as a manager, I want to make sure that people in my supply chain are not doing the really bad things. I've got suppliers that are ripping off their vendors and not paying them, because there is a social justice part of sustainability. And so I had some people write back to me, and they said, well, thank you for defining what sustainability was not. You know, and you've got the environmental leg, the social leg, and then you've got to have enterprises where people can make a living. Animal welfare would go in the social part of it. You know, somebody's out there beating cattle with a steel rod. That's obviously totally terrible, violates sustainability. But there's a tendency lots of times on these things to think way too top-down, way too vague. Vague generalizations. Education field is really bad at this. I'd rather look at things more specific. Okay, you got a particular school where the kids are having really good outcomes. What did that school do to make those kids have good outcomes? You see, in bottom-up thinking, which is the same way artificial intelligence works, specific examples are clumped into categories to form concepts. That is bottom-up. And that's how an AI program actually works. That's how my mind works. And sometimes you can learn a lot, let's say in education. What are some of the common denominators of the worst schools? What are some of the common denominators of schools where the kids are having good outcomes? What's a good outcome? Get and keep a decent job. Go on to the university. Some may need to go right into a skilled trade before the Sheridan in Pittsburgh totally falls apart. I'm really, really concerned about infrastructure. I was in Chicago recently. The taxi drivers complaining about the steel structure at the airport parking ramp. And then I saw bridges kind of taped together with steel plates scabbed on there with bolts. I'm going, you know, this is really bad. They need to rebuild those bridges. Okay, I'll take a couple of more questions, and then I think we'll end. Okay, right there.
So as far as labels go, do you think that the treatment and diagnosis of autism would be better off if autism was removed from the DSM?
I don't know. I have problems with the DSM. I am trained as a hardcore biological scientist, and I'd rather use the brain scans. And this talk doesn't have my brain scans, which is the advanced DTI imaging, where you can actually map individual axons, and you can tell where there's an intersection, like a bridge goes over a highway, versus where there's a intersection versus a bridge. And you can track these cable bundles in the brain. And I have a lot of extra bushes going from the circuit for speak what you say, which probably explains my visual thinking. Got a lot of extra branches. Now, at what point are extra branches abnormal? There's no black and white dividing line. It's a continuous trait. See, that's the thing that people don't understand. When it comes to genetics, throw Mendel away. He's only 20% of genetics. You know, black Angus cattle, they put their black coat on every animal because that's a dominant trait. That's simple Mendelian. Blue eyes is recessive. You got to have 2 genes to get blue eyes. That's just simple Mendelian. But there's a whole lot of other traits, and I think being autistic's one of them, where it's continuous. I've actually had my genome scanned, and it explained a whole lot of physical things wrong with me. Yeah, I'm really glad I didn't get teeth implants because my jaw would have busted. I was right not to do that. I've got a bleeding disorder. My skin's horrible. I've got a heart murmur. I mean, it explained a whole bunch of stuff like that. But when it came to the autism, yeah, I got some Shank genes. But the thing is, there's a whole lot of these genes that determine the degree of autism. It's not Mendelian. Like you breed Angus to Hereford, that's a brown animal with a white face, you get what's called a black baldy, black coat with a white face. You always get that. That's Mendelian genetics. But then you take, this is a question I asked my college biology teacher, and it stumped him. So we got these 2 dogs. One's a Springer Spaniel, and the other's a Border Collie. And when you breed those 2 dogs together, you get a dog that looks like what you'd expect half and half to look like. You know, you think any dog, you know, if it's a cross just between 2 breeds, like Labrador and German Shepherd, for example, you can tell that it's a Lab German Shepherd cross. Those are continuous traits. That's not Mendelian. And he says, oh, it just has to do with the mutations. I never could believe that. That's now been found out to be wrong. Yeah, all my physical problems popped right out. I found out that if I have hip surgery and they give me the regular dose of warfarin, I will die. I found that from genomic analysis. I have to be careful on how many aspirins I take because I could bleed. Okay, we'll take 2 more questions right over there. What do I do to relieve stress? Exercise. I do 100 sit-ups every night on the bed. I hate every one of them. I hate them. I hate exercising. Hate it. And then now I've got sciatic problems with my nerves, pinching, and I have to do my physical therapy every night. I hate that too. But I find if I fail to do that burst of exercise every night, then I can't sleep. And the burst of exercise, doing 100 sit-ups quick without stopping on the bed, works a whole lot better than walking. Like I added up how far I walked in the airport, and it's a long ways. But that doesn't do it the way the burst of exercise does. You know, that's exercise. You're not going to get me in the gym. I hate all that stuff. But I do my 100 sit-ups, and it took me 6 months to get up to where I could do 100 without stopping. And I do put my hands forward, but it's 100 without stopping on the bed. I had to find something that I could do when I'm traveling and not have any excuse for not doing it, because I don't like it. I also take antidepressant medication, and if you're interested in these sort of things, you can get my book, Thinking in Pictures. And that describes visual thinking. The autistic brain describes the visual thinking, but how I dealt with anxiety is also in Thinking in Pictures. Okay, a couple more, and then, well, I'm not supposed to go over an hour, so Let's get a couple more questions. Okay, right there.
Which brain scan that you had done on yourself was the most insightful?
Well, the visual thinking one, that's an ancient old technology. You can see that scan's 10 years old, more than 10 years old. I looked at that and I go, wow. But the thing about the brain scans is everything that showed up in the brain scans showed up in the classroom. When I was in 3rd grade, my ability in art became very evident, and I tended to just draw horses over and over again, and they would broaden it out. Let's draw a stable, let's draw a saddle. Take that interest and broaden it. Then I brain scan that shows the water right in the algebra department. I have no working memory. So any task that involves sequence, I need to write it down, like a pilot's checklist. You just give the kid a pilot's checklist. 1 to 3 words on each bullet point. That's all you have to do. That's easy. In engineering, that's called a workaround. You just do it. And then the real fancy scanning, it explained why I had trouble getting my speech out, because I had less fibers for speak what you hear, speak what you see. So what they do with the therapy is increase the bandwidth on the fibers that are left. This technology's around. Even the fancy stuff's sitting in the hospital. The fancy stuff's been put in there for looking at head injuries on veterans. Well, then that's hideous. Because in developmental disorder, the fiber bundles don't grow all the way. When you have a head injury, it just rips them. And if you take an entire fiber bundle and rip it in half, it's not going to grow back. You're talking about axons that long. They don't grow back. It's pretty hideous when you look at the head injury stuff. And they're using the technology for head injuries. But you see, this is where in medicine we get silos. Okay, I can remember when the security x-rays first came out. And I go, why are they not using that in medicine? Now they're getting better digital x-rays. But why for years they didn't start using some of that software? It's silos. People get in silos. And they don't go outside their silos and take an idea from some other different industry. Because the thing that amazes me is you can see all the soft tissue on a leather bag in that thing. Well, now they've got x-rays that are just about as good, but 20 years ago, they didn't. Why weren't they jumping all over that software? It's silos. And silos can be difficult to knock down. And this is the reason why that brain scanner is sitting there in the hospital and not being used. And it's Walter Snyder, University of Pittsburgh, DTI imaging, top of the line. It's on all the top of the line Simon scanners now. You see, even those things, I did them 5 years ago. And you could actually look at a kid and you could say, well, we need to work on his expressive language because he's 25% less fibers for expressive language. So then you work on it, and the fibers you got left, you work on it and you expand them and you get more bandwidth. And it even tells you whether the fibers that got integrity or not. It's color-coded. It's like really super simple to look at. That's not being used. I think that's stupid. But that's silos. And one of the things I've tried to do in my whole career is bust through silos, and it's difficult. One thing we did in our animal science meeting, which I think is really bad, we have the dairy science department, animal science, and poultry science. And we used to have our whole meeting together, where you'd have the poultry science scientists, the dairy science, and then the animal science, which is mostly cattle, sheep, and pigs, all together in one big meeting. Well, they got in a fight over something totally stupid, and they split up the meetings. That's the dumbest thing they could have ever did. Even though I'm not in poultry, I liked going over and looking at the poultry papers, and I could see something where something I learned in poultry applied to cattle. This is why we've got to bust out of silos. Dumbest thing they ever did. And then some of the vendors at the trade show aren't coming because there's not enough people there to make it worth their while to come to the trade show. So that's like super stupid. You know, we need to be busting up silos between computer science, electrical engineering, physics, biology. That's what we need to be doing. One more and then we'll stop right there. Bullying in school. The only place I was not bullied was where there was a shared interest, and I did get bullied in college too. Shared interests. In high school, it was riding horses, electronics lab, and model rockets. In college, we had a school variety show that I went in, and I got a lot of friends through that. Friends through shared interests. Then the other problem when you get into work is you can get bad bosses. There's like two kinds of bad bosses. There's the bad boss everybody hates, and then there's the bad boss that just picks on the person that's kind of weird. Another thing, if you're doing an engineering job, lots of times they're too vague on telling you what they want you to do. So when I was doing design work all the time, I'd sit down and say, now, okay, let's just get the parameters of this job. I got to stay 10 feet off the railroad track. You own the land outside the fence so I can have it. In other words, I'm setting the parameters for the job. We got to run this system with 3 people. It's got to cost under this price. In other words, giving me parameters. I'll do the designing, but I need to have some parameters so I get an idea of what the scope of the project is. And I'd always sit down and kind of clarify that at the project meeting. And then you got the guy there with his arms crossed like this, and then he'll sabotage a project because he doesn't like this weird nerd coming in on his territory. Had some problems with that. Well, I think it's time to sign some books, and thank you all for coming. Okay, well, thank you. And I'm sorry about all the coughing, but I just couldn't help it. Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much. So we have a reception outside. Temple is going to be setting up a table to sign books. So we have cake and goodies, and stick around and get to know Dr. Grandin.